All right, well, if anyone can explain where the opposition's been trying to go with those VIP flight questions and other happenings in the House this week, Manager of Opposition Business Paul Fletcher probably can. He's back with us live in the studio. Welcome. Paul, Richard Marles's travel using VIP planes. He says he's complied with the guidelines. You asked two questions early on in the week, went quiet and returned to it again today. To what end?
We just had 3 minutes there. You just played the grab of Richard Marles not answering the question. Look, $3.6 million of VIP flights that he's racked up. And this is a government that promised transparency and accountability, but they're not giving information on why Mr Marles has taken so many flights, where he's gone. Was he, as we asked in that question, has he been using the RAAF VIP aircraft to commute home from Canberra to Avalon Airport?
Well, isn't he entitled to do that, just as National's deputy prime ministers would have, and in fact did, whether it was to Tamworth, to Wagga Wagga? This is an entitlement.
Well, Mr Marles seems very reluctant to give any information about his use of this. Of these taxpayers' assets. Now, of course, there are legitimate reasons to use VIP aircraft. Nobody is contesting that. But at the same time, this is a government promised transparency. So what we've been doing is using the forms of the Parliament to ask Mr Marles to explain what he's been doing. And of course, this comes at a time when, for most Australians, travelling by air is more expensive than ever. Airfares about 50% higher now in many cases than they were before the pandemic. And so at the same time as Mr Marles is jetting around using the VIP aircraft, he doesn't have to worry about that. We've got the Transport and Infrastructure Minister, Catherine King, being unable to give a good explanation of why she refused to take a pro-competitive decision to allow more flights by Qatar.
Right, so this is the politics of envy tension you're creating here, is it? That people struggling under high airfares and high cost of living pressures might resent a Deputy Prime Minister travelling by these means?
The first thing I'd say is this is a government that promised accountability and transparency. This is a use of public assets. Now, again, I make the point, there is a legitimate reason for VIP aircraft to be made available for use by very senior ministers, but that needs to be used responsibly and economically, and the government needs to be ready to explain the extent to which VIP aircraft have been used by Mr Marles, and has he been using it effectively as a way of commuting home at the end of every parliamentary week. But it also goes to public policy questions, including competition policy about aviation, a very important industry, a very important sector of our economy, and what we're seeing is it appears to be very badly managed under this transport minister.
I may not go through that with you because it has been the subject of lengthy interviews by us all week, but can I take you to something that I think you're more directly involved with, and that is the tone of the House. And I think by everyone's recognition, it has gone up or gone down, depending which way you look at it. Peter Dutton said today it was volatile in the House. Milton Dick, the Speaker, said by any measure it's been a combative week. Are you dialling up the intensity of the tone of the House in order to get more combative, to give it to the government?
Not at all. What we're seeking to do is use question time for its legitimate and proper purpose, which is to be asking questions. And so yesterday we did move a motion of dissent in the Speaker, and it was about the issue of the approval of Qatar flights to and from Australia, because that is a very important issue which directly bears on the prices Australians are paying for air travel. We know those prices have gone up, and Catherine King has failed to give consistent explanations on this. Yesterday we were unhappy with a ruling the Speaker gave. He effectively ruled that what she was saying was relevant to the question she was asked, when she was frankly obfuscating and failing to give a clear answer.
Do you have an abiding problem with Speaker Milton Dick? Are you as much testing him as you are the government this week?
Look, as Opposition Leader Peter Dutton said yesterday in speaking to the motion of dissent in the Speaker's ruling, it's in no way a personal criticism of the Speaker. Everybody knows it's a challenging job. It's a very important job in our democracy. But at the same time, it's very important that any parliamentarian be able to use the procedures that are permitted under the standing orders, including moving dissent. Doesn't happen very often at all, but we did it for a very specific reason, because we are pressing for clear answers on exactly why the government rejected this application for additional Qatar flights, when every Australian knows the prices of airfares are much higher than they were pre-pandemic, and what we need is more competition.
Now, sometimes the use of these tactics can have unintended consequences. North Sydney Teal Independent Kylie Tink has stood on the floor of the House this afternoon and claimed, amongst other things, that she was bullied by a member of the opposition. I'm not sure she specified National or Liberal, but do you condone or condemn whatever treatment was meted out to her? Will you do anything to investigate it?
I'm not aware of the specifics of the incident, and of course in the Parliament, as in any workplace, we should treat each other with civility and respect. At the same time, the Parliament is a forum to ask questions on behalf of the Australian people, and in the opposition we take that very, very seriously. And when we have, as we have with Minister Catherine King, a minister who's given now 9 separate explanations for a decision she took to block an application for additional flights from Qatar, then it's only appropriate that we do ask questions about that. We saw a new explanation effectively proffered today, that it had something to do with the very regrettable, of course, episode last year where Australian women were removed from a plane and strip searched. Of course, the opposition, together with the government, thinks that's absolutely unacceptable. But if the government is saying that's the reason for rejecting additional flights, then why is it the Prime Minister was saying earlier this week Qatar is free to bring more flights to secondary airports like Hobart or like Adelaide?
Right. So is that a policy position that you're drifting towards based on Catherine King's explanations, that Qatar would now be unfit because of that incident?
No, certainly not. But what we are saying is, where is the consistency in Minister King's explanations? And the fact is she's desperately grabbing for any explanation she can find to try and defend a decision which is very difficult to defend. And Australians are looking at the Australians are dissatisfied about higher airfares from Qantas, cancelled flights. They're frustrated about a sense of a very cosy relationship between this government and Qantas. What's important, Qantas is an important company, of course, but what's important is that we have a pro-competitive policy in aviation to keep airlines under competitive pressure. That's when they're going to do their best for their customers, to reduce prices, to increase choices. That's what any rational aviation policy would have as its centrepiece. It's far from clear that's what Minister Catherine King is delivering.
All right, now thank you for covering that with us. Just one more on the tone and mood of the House, I suppose, because it was a notable shift, I think, this week. Pharmacists booted out earlier in the week noisily and objecting to attendance. Have you sought to establish whether any Liberal MPs had either encouraged them from down on the floor or signed them in and kind of taken responsibility for their conduct?
Look, it is important that people who are in the visitors' galleries conduct themselves appropriately, and if they're not, they can be removed. Now, we've had very disappointing incidents over the years. There was an incident a couple of years ago where climate change protesters glued their hands to the railings. So these things happen from time to time. The Speaker made a statement about it. That was appropriate for him to be reminding MPs, but also people who come into the Parliament. Australians are very welcome to come into our Parliament. It's their Parliament after all. But when you're in the visitors' gallery, there are certain expectations of behaviour, and that's just as there are expectations on parliamentarians, there are expectations on Australians who are in the visitors' gallery.
Yeah, fair point. I think that message did come across loud and clear. Let's see what next week brings. Paul Fletcher, thanks so much for joining us again today.